Thursday is when we'll take the exam. Okay? All right, so just to wrap up of what we were talking about yesterday, I think both my classes got here, but we were talking about physical and chemical properties. Okay, so physical properties are ones where you still have the same substance as you're figuring out what the substance or what the property of the substance is. Okay, so like water. Some examples of a physical property of water is I could figure out what the color of water is, but it would still be H2O. Or I could figure out if it's a solid, liquid, or gas, and it'll still be H2O. Or I can figure out what the density, the mass, and the volume of water is, and it'll still be H2O. Okay? But chemical properties are when you actually have to destroy or change the substance to figure out if it has that property. So an example would be if something is flammable. To figure out if it's flammable, you light it on fire. And so if it's flammable, then you've destroyed that substance. Or if it's corrosive, okay? To figure out if something is corrosive, it's actually going to react with something else. So if you ever hear of something reacting, then that means that it is changing what it is at a particle level. Or if something is explosive, you're destroying it. Okay, so an example of this would be iron. Okay, a lot of people don't know that iron can rust over time, and when iron rusts, it's actually turning from, I'm going to type it right here, from iron, which is Fe, and then when it rusts, it turns into FeO, iron oxide. Okay. All right, and so see how it goes from one type of element to a completely different compound. It's not like water up here where we have H2O, H2O, H2O as it changes from a solid to a liquid, a gas. This turns into something completely different. So to figure out that property, if something is able to rust or not, then we actually have to change what the substance is at the atomic level. So that's an example of a chemical composition. Think that you're changing what the chemical is. Okay? Okay, so I want you to pause the video right for a second, and I want you to try to classify these 9 properties. So we've got melting point, density, corrosiveness, color, boiling point, explosiveness, odor, state, flammability. And I want you to decide, is this an example of a physical property? I can figure it out about the substance without changing what it is. Or is it an example of a chemical property where I actually have to turn it into something else to figure out if it has this property? So you pause and try to figure it out, and then you can press play and we'll figure out the answers. Okay, so let's take a look at these answers here. Okay, so the melting point is something where water is a easy thing to think of. I can take water and melt it from a solid to a liquid, and it's still water. So that's physical, okay? The density of a substance. So to find the density of anything, density is equal to the mass divided by the volume, okay? And so I can find the mass of something, and it's still that substance. I could find the volume of something, and it's still that substance. I didn't have to actually change what it was to figure it out, okay? So that is a physical property. Corrosiveness, again, we talked about that. That's a chemical property. It's going to react with something, cause it to break down. And so when it does that, then it's reacting with it and turning into something new. Color. You can look at the color of a substance, and it's still that same substance. Physical. Flammability, we talked about that one. You destroy it to figure out if it's flammable, so it's chemical. State. State of matter. So is it a solid, liquid, or gas? And that is a physical one. You can figure it out without changing it. If it has an odor, then that is a physical property. Some people will get a little upset about this one because they'll say, well, when something smells, doesn't that indicate that the substance is changing? Here's an example. When you are baking bread, okay, you're turning it in from the flour, the sugar, the water, so on and so forth. You're baking it into something new, bread, and it gives off this really nice odor. Well, that's an indication that the substance is changing, but it's not an actual chemical property. It's a physical property. Okay, so we'll talk about that one later. Explosiveness, chemical, and then boiling point is just like the melting point. You could boil something, and all it's doing is going from a liquid to a gas, but it's still the same chemical. Okay, still the same chemical composition.